Hello, I'm Kieran and welcome to Tactica Imperialis. This is the first of my Age of Sigmar tactics videos. So throughout this video I'm just going to kind of be going over why I'm doing a series on Age of Sigmar and the tactics involved, and sort of what the basics of Age of Sigmar are, just for people that don't know or are a bit unfamiliar with it. So why bother doing tactics for Age of Sigmar? Well, as I'm sure most of you will know, it's got its points released. Everyone's had a bit of time to playtest it, and it seems to be working alright as a system, which is quite nice. Now I know that I got a lot of hate to start with because it didn't have any points values and things, which, to be honest, was a bit of a gripe for everyone, but now that that's sorted, it plays a lot smoother. The game's sort of 1,000 points, you know what you're getting, it looks like it would have used to it in Warhammer Fantasy. It's the points value sort of system plays very similar to 40k, so same sort of size games will look of a similar size, and also it's got missions now, which is a really nice way of doing things. So rather than just having two forces coming at each other and murdering each other, you've got like actual objectives and stuff to do, which really helps sort of bring the game back into being like a proper war game rather than just a collection of miniatures and some dice. So well, first of all, what makes it different to playing 40k other than the setting? So obviously the setting's really important, but we'll go over that at some other points. So it functions really similarly to 40k on a lot of levels, but differently. I mean, it's a war game, so they'll all function fairly similarly. So the aim of the game is still the same. You've got to either kill your opponent or capture objectives, and the way you do that is exactly the same. You've got a combat phase, you've got a shooting phase, much like you've got in 40k. So I think the easiest way of doing this is to talk about the way the game is structured. So if you look at the phases of the game, you start off with the hero phase, which is the big difference, I suppose, to Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k. So the hero phase is like a combination of what your warlord trait would be doing in 40k and then the psychic phase and some other cool stuff. So the hero phase is basically where your general gives out inspiring speeches, tells your troops to do this, that and the other, and giving them bonuses. It's where all your spellcasters cast their spells. It's where your other heroes do cool things, so stuff like the Bloodstoker there will whip guys. It's where Bloodsecrator will plant his banner, and it's kind of where you set up all your buffs for the rest of the turn. So that, right from the start, is a really big difference. There's a lot of tactical decisions to be made in that, and I'll be going over each of the phases individually in some further videos, but this is sort of just an overview. So that's the first main difference, is you've got that sort of setting up phase at the start of each turn. You move on to your movement phase, which is, you know, the same as a movement phase has always been. You move your guys around, you can walk normally, you can run, which stops you from shooting and charging, and all the stuff like that. There's a couple of things that are interesting about the movement phase, but nothing major other than just sort of like tactically moving these guys here, this, that and the other. You go into your shooting phase, which works almost identically to the shooting phase in Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k. You pick a unit, you look at what weapons they're equipped with for shooting, you roll your dice, decide what weapons do, inflict damage, take off casualties, end of story. Then you go into your charge phase, which is like the same as it always was. So you roll 2 dice, add them together, that's the number of inches you can charge. The main difference being you don't need to declare your target until after you've rolled the dice. So if you roll a really low charge, you can charge something really close if there's something nearby, but if you roll really high, you don't have to charge that unit, you can charge one further away. But again, very, very similar to charging at the start of the fight phase in 40k or at the start of the movement phase in Warhammer Fantasy. You've then got your combat phase, which is perhaps the biggest change. So you each take it in turns to select a unit, starting with the person whose turn it is, to pile in an attack. So what you do is you select your unit, everyone in that unit piles in, strikes their blows, uses all their attack profiles, and then you finish there, and then your opponent will pick a unit to attack with, and then it'll go back and forth until one person runs out of units and then the other person completes the rest of theirs. So everyone gets to fight that's in combat, but there's no initiative anymore. It's just I pick, then you pick, then I pick, then you pick, that brings in more dynamics of, well, which fight do you need to win, which guys are more likely to survive, and other interesting things like that. So it means that the armies that would have been slower previously don't have that problem. whereas armies that would have been a lot quicker, like elves and things that are a bit more like glass hammers, have to be a bit more careful, because there's no guarantee they'll go first. So it brings in another dynamic to the game, which is quite nice and a bit more thinking involved. So after the fight phase, once you've taken all your casualties off, you've got the battle shock phase, which is basically just a phase devoted to morale tests and break tests and things. So you'll roll a dice for each unit that's suffered casualties, compare it to the number of casualties they've suffered and their bravery, and any negative modifiers for things or any positive modifiers for banners, etc. And then a certain number of guys will flee. So this mechanic's quite nice in that your entire unit won't run off on a bad roll, but equally it means that there are chances where, right, okay, I've inflicted enough casualties on this unit, no matter what you do, it's all going to run away. Like, you can't roll a double 1 and it'd be okay. Equally, you can't roll like a double 6 and it fail completely when it's not a problem. So that's quite a nice phase. It's more of a clear up sort of a phase at the end of the game, at the end of each turn, where you just sort everything out. But so they are the phases of the game. So you start off with your hero phase, go into movement phase, shooting phase, charge phase, combat phase, and battle shock. So 6 phases as opposed to the normal 3 or 4. 3 or 4. And so that brings a bit more dynamics into it. The big change, though, between Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar, or even Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar, is the fact that the turns aren't structured the way they would normally be. So you've got, at the end of each pair of turns, so each battle round, as it's called, you both roll a dice, and the winner gets to decide who goes first or second next turn. So if I win the roll-off, I can choose to go first, or I can choose to make my opponent go first. And that brings in like a much bigger dynamic. So rather than laying out your plan carefully and being like, okay, I'll do this turn, and then my opponent will do this, and then I'll react by doing this, you've got to take into account that you might not have time to react, and there's a chance that your opponent will get 2 turns in a row, and there's nothing you can do about that, but equally there's a chance you'll get 2 turns in a row. And it means different armies will play very differently. So you may not always want to go first like you do in 40k or Age of Sigmar, or Warhammer Fantasy. Just because if you go first, there's no chance of you getting 2 turns in a row on the second turn of the game. Whereas if you know you're going second, you might get 2 turns in a row, and then you can get all your charges off, or whatever. Or if you're a shooting army, you might want to go first, just to mitigate that, and make sure that you can inflict enough casualties on the first round before your opponent gets to put his buffs on units from all his heroes, because he's not had a hero phase yet, and stuff like that. But we'll talk about that in more detail at another point. But they're the two big differences at sort of the hero phase, and then the priority. So taking a turn, and then not going in like the same order throughout the entire game. So they're the two main differences, I think, between Age of Sigmar and previous editions. So bearing that in mind, the points values and things coming into the game now seem fair. They're quite basic still, but because they're basic and like units have a lot of leeway with upgrades they can take and things, everything seems to balance fairly well. I mean, there are units that are just good, there are units that aren't good, but the same can be said of 40k, the same can be said of Warhammer Fantasy, and I think it's a lot more forgiving in Age of Sigmar, just because, okay, this unit might not be the best unit you can get for that amount of points, but you can usually find a use for it if you build around it. Whereas, like, an obvious example in 40k would have been like Vespids will never ever be worth their points. Or I can't think of one from Warhammer Fantasy, like Noblars, for instance. Don't ever bother taking them. But let's not get into an argument about whether Vespids are good or not, because that's not really the point of the video. So the points seem alright, everything sort of seems to be falling into place again. So the other big thing that came out of it was a universal force organisation chart, which kind of helps out. It's a very basic combined arms thing, so you've got to have at least one hero. Regardless, you've got to have 2 battle line units, which are like your troop choices. And then you can have up to however many monsters, depending on the size of the game, and however many pieces of artillery, depending on the size of the game. So in subsequent videos I'll be going into all the different sort of uses for each of the troops, and what sort of I'd think of troops as being. Now there's loads of different sort of categories, but on the surface of it, realistically, you've got, as far as I can see it, 3 separate types of heroes. Sort of 2 different types of troops, 2 different types of cavalry, and then sort of monsters. There's probably 2 different types there, and then there's artillery, chariots, and other miscellaneous sort of things. So looking at characters, the 3 sort of types I'd look at would be, there are characters that are designed to be your general, and so the main thing about them is they've got a really good command ability, and usually quite good sort of resilience to things. So stuff like the Mighty Lord of Khorne, I'm trying to think of other ones off the top of my head now that have good command ability. Stuff like Archaon's quite a good example. I've forgotten the guy from it, the Stormcast, who gives +1 to hit for everyone. Not an amazing combat character, not a bad combat character, but you'll be taking him for his command ability. Those kind of units. You've got heroes that are obviously just sort of beat sticks. So these heroes can also monsters at times, but other times they're not. So people like the Exalted Deathbringer, people like the Celestial Prime, Saurus, Old Bloods, or Sunbloods I think is the one I'm thinking of. But heroes that are just designed to kill things. And then you've got support heroes like the Bloodstoker, Bloodsecrator, who are not really there to kill things. They don't have a command ability, but you take them for their sort of ability to support other units in the hero phase. So people like wizards involved in this would be another really good example. So they're your 3 sort of types of heroes. The 2 main battle line units you tend to see are like elite Chaos Warrior-esque units, so quite hard to kill, decent armor saves, and then sort of a horde approach to a troop unit, so Blood Reavers, Goblins, Free Company, Skeletons, Zombies, all that sort of low save, not great hit rolls, not great wound rolls, but really cheap and take lots of them, and they often get bonuses for having big groups, so like +1 to hit if there's 20 of them, etc. So they're the 2 types of sort of battle line units. You've got cavalry, which kind of all group into one, or other fast moving units. So stuff like Juggernauts, Marauder Horsemen, Seekers of Slanesh, all that sort of stuff. Sometimes they can fly, sometimes they can't, but fast moving units that are quite useful. So not always necessarily heavy hitting, but fast moving and quite annoying. You've got stuff like chariots, which I'd class as sort of like a War Machine-esque thing. So lots of different attacks on the same platform, quite a big group of wounds, fairly decent saves, but not monsters. You've got your artillery, so cannons, catapults, etc. But they're fairly obvious again as to what they do. And then you've got monsters, which is perhaps the coolest part of Age of Sigmar, really. So monsters cover a wide variety of different monsters. You've got like lesser monsters like Kograths and Demon Princes that don't get worse when they're wounded and are like just really elite shock troops, would be the way of looking at them. You've got bigger monsters like Bloodthirsters and like Greater Demons and things. Stuff like the Carnosaur, which are also heroes and just incredibly powerful units, usually have quite good command abilities, usually incredibly tough and really good at killing things, and they're sort of centerpiece models. They're what you base your army around, and they're brutal. So I'll be looking at all the different types of units in more detail throughout the series, but I just wanted to sort of give an overview of what everything's going to be about and what's going to be going on in this. The other thing I'm going to try and do is, once we've gone through like unit types, building up your army, I'm going to look at all the relics equivalents and like warlord trait equivalents, because I can't remember what they're called, for having your allegiance, and the way allegiance and battle line change and all of this. It's probably going to be the next video, is looking at structuring your army, building lists and things. And then at the end of the series, after looking at everything and seeing how it all fits together, I'm going to look at building a couple of like 500 point armies, and then maybe seeing if I can do some sort of bat reps with them and get everything sort of like finalised and put together. So I really hope that helps. Also, sorry for the audio on the intro video. I was recording on my laptop and awful, in a word. Hopefully the audio is a lot better this time. So that's kind of everything for today, just because I wanted to do an overview, get everything put out there with better audio hopefully, and just kind of make people aware that I'm going to be doing this, and hopefully people will enjoy it. So that's all from me. I've been Kieran from Tactica Imperialis, and this is a start of my Age of Sigmar Tactica. I'll see you guys later. Bye.